first and foremost, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And thank you for joining us for our webinar, our first ever Marketing Ops webinar, Marketing at the Speed of Change, the pivotal role of marketing ops in the next normal. I'm Aubrey Morgan. I am our Director of Digital Demand Gen and Operations. And I am so excited to be here with you guys today. We have a great discussion ahead, and it's going to be a good time. So I'm going to start with something very exciting, which is housekeeping. And that is, just a couple notes just to common questions. One, that a recording of the webinar will be distributed from our team within the next 24 hours, definitely today, but at some point. And then questions can be submitted in the Zoom portal. At this stage, after a year of quarantine, I'm sure many of you are familiar with how to submit questions through Zoom. And then also at the very end of this webinar, please do give us feedback. We are looking to do many more of these in the future, so your feedback is welcomed and appreciated. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of just set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. And this is a new study from McKinsey that came out just a month ago. This quote, I think, really is the essence of what we're going to be talking about today. The COVID-19 crisis has created an imperative for companies to reconfigure their operations and an opportunity to transform them. To the extent they do so, greater productivity will follow. And so what we mean by that, and this slide was no fun to put together, but a year ago this week, we started to really understand COVID's long-term impact to our marketing programs. We had abrupt market shifts, budget, headcount, resource cuts, everything was happening. Face-to-face marketing channels were completely eliminated for the long haul. We knew that officially in April, right? Things like Dreamforce and other events were canceled for the remainder of the year at the bare minimum. And, holiday parties started to get canceled. It was not a great week. We started working 100% remote, and some companies were even saying that that may be permanent. Then on top of that, you expand increased buyers' needs with little to no data to back up the hypotheses for these unprecedented events. So it was tons of trial and error in marketing. All this change then caused workload to increase, but one team in particular in marketing felt the brunt of this, and that was in fact marketing ops. So where are we today? Just to explain kind of how we got to this point, the world we operated in before COVID-19 is what we're going to call the old normal. And for a little over a year now, we've been living with this new normal. We had to operate out of necessity to first stabilize operations. Then we blasted off into an exponential shift toward digital transformation. We had to embrace platforms, integrated data sets, collaborative tools. And then, marketing ops was building all this infrastructure to make it happen alongside many other people as well. It's been a huge, huge leap for many marketing teams. And for most of us, this was the direction we were headed in anyways. The difference though is that COVID-19 kind of forced our hand, and we essentially experienced 2 years of transformation in the course of 1 to 2 months. So now as we move into what we're calling the next normal, we're starting to think about how we'll get employees and customers back into the workplaces safely. We're preparing training and documentation for all of these new digital programs that we've built over the past year and where we're going in the future. And we're continuing to enhance customer experiences and deciding, what societal efforts we're going to carry forward. The truth is that we're really not going back to the old normal. I think it took me until this very moment to realize that. But while, many marketing-led innovations have garnered a lot of attention for their ability to be nimble, what's gone less examined is how marketing functions are actually operating better in the midst of this new normal. And, for example, the mass acclimation to Zoom or professionals working from home while homeschooling, and also just generally the testing and retesting that we've had to do to figure out what success even looks like in this new normal. Because there has been no historical data to tell us that. So that's what we're here to discuss today. And so I am so excited to be joined by, I mean, honestly, honored and humbled to be joined by our two rock star marketers. And first up, well, you know, I just introduced myself, so no need to introduce myself again, but we have Cristina Saunders, and Chrissy is the co-founder of CS2 Marketing, a B2B SaaS marketing agency founded right here in Silicon Valley. She was at the forefront of marketing ops and brings over a decade of experience in ops and demand gen. But honestly, that's just her daytime job. She's also the co-host of the Forward Thinking podcast, a weekly podcast for B2B marketers and marketing ops professionals. It's been recently in my podcast rotation, and I'll actually share a link to that in the chat. If not, I'll definitely have our team send it out afterwards if I forget or can't figure it out. And she's also the co-founder of the nonprofit Women in Revenue. So I don't know how you do it all, Chrissy, but thank you for being here today. Really honored.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah, and thanks. Also welcoming Rebecca White. She is currently the CEO of Row Strategy, marketing strategy consultancy for SaaS cloud and open source orgs. Prior to founding Row Strategy, Rebecca was the VP of marketing at Databook and brings over 20 years of global marketing experience at enterprise tech companies. Very excited to have you with us as well today, Rebecca. So we have a ton to cover. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just so that we can see your faces. Okay. Oops. Sorry, 1 second. I'm just making sure I have this in front of me. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so let's start with it, shall we? So my first question is kind of around the theme. This is what a lot of people were asking about prior to this webinar. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about this notion of the hyper agile org. You know, with COVID-19, it's truly been a catalyst for change, which I've already talked about. From a planning perspective, we could no longer rely on past performance or even predictive models that rely on historical data. So I guess, Rebecca, I'll start with you. What do you think about leadership enabling this notion of hyper agility? And specifically, how do we move to this model of being able to move like a startup, but without, you know, creating too much friction that you actually hurt employee productivity or increase burnout?
Yeah, last year was really a wild ride for all of us. I don't think anybody has ever had any experience that was even remotely like that. So, but you know, it tends to drive home the same things that we already knew about marketing and marketing ops, which is that you need organizational alignment across and up and down the organization. Remote work requires it, but all work requires it. So I think that this year really showed us that when push comes to shove, that alignment is critical, and in a crisis, even more so. In general, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was agreeing with you.
Yeah. So in general, I mean, the successful companies that I've seen, and I think we've all seen, they're all working toward a common goal. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is a C-suite compensating people differently than the goals they're actually trying to get them to achieve. So they're compensating people for the wrong behaviors. And this is true of sales, it's true of marketing. I don't know as much as it's true of success or finance, but certainly from a marketing perspective, often you're compensated on the wrong goals. You know, in some ways, the emphasis on MQLs was a disservice to the front end cooperation. So, you know, saying that this is the be all end all in MQL, that was tough on the business, but, you know, that was kind of a prevalent strategy for a long time. Qualified leads certainly are an important measure, but they aren't necessarily sales ready. The other thing is that if you understand strategy and goals up and down the organization, you're compensated for the right behaviors and you actually do the right things. This is totally important during a global crisis. So there's no room for kind of screwing around and doing, vanity projects or like to haves rather than must haves. That's something that I think most marketing teams have realized, and they're now more able to say, okay, this is something that's actually strategically important to the organization versus this is something that we can put off for a while. The other thing is that hyper agility requires that you own your business. So you can't be calling it in, phoning it in. You actually have to understand why you're making all the decisions that you're making, how they align to the ultimate goals of the business, which in this case is the CEO's goals and the C-suite's goals, and then using that information so that you can turn on a dime while protecting your long-term projects. So you don't want to, in an environment like this, suddenly stop doing anything that's strategically important because it's not an immediate win driving pipeline, right? So if you have all your ducks in the row, super clean documentation, plans, schemas, visual illustrations for people who want to learn something in 5 minutes rather than 2 hours. If you have that, then you are able to turn on a dime much better than if you don't. Most CEOs didn't grow up as marketers or marketing ops people, and hopefully that'll change. But as of right now, they really don't have that experience or that expertise. So it's sort of your job to make them understand how it works.
Yeah, that was very insightful. Thank you. Chrissy, I want to ask you kind of just the different side of that. From your experience, how do marketing ops teams actually operationalize this concept of hyper agility on the marketing? Not just on the marketing team, but across the business.
Yeah, and I like this concept because I think if we look back at last year and look at the ops teams that are actually able to be agile, really the consistent thing was that they actually had a strong operational foundation. And so that was kind of a unique identifier. And I think when people started to realize this moment of, wow, operations actually is super important, especially when you're pushed to these hard times. And a few examples of that is, some of those winners were able to scale their online programs. They already were able to do that before because they had the systems in place. They had a process for it. Everything, adding on another or a few more online programs wasn't as disruptive to the team because they had the resources, the process to support that. And then if you look at everything else that was there, they were able to implement new tools quickly because they had a strong foundation. They had the people to do that. We all know that new tech requires the people and the data and the process to support that, and they could act quickly, or they might even have those tools already in place. And then, looking even further to partner with the CMO, they could actually provide the reporting or have the data structure in place to say, now that we have these dollars that we can reposition somewhere else, let's look at the reports. Let's see what, where there's opportunities for that. And they were able to do that quickly instead of having to scramble and try and figure out the reports to do that. So I think that is a huge sign of that. Like, you have the strong foundation, the processes in place, the people there too, you're able to be agile. And then that doesn't even take into account the channels that people were leaning on, like email, where everyone decided to start emailing. That was like the marketing strategy. The ops teams that were a bit more forward thinking actually knew, okay, email isn't a marketing strategy. It's just part of it. And so instead of, pissing off, for lack of better words, their prospects and customers and emailing all of them, they were able to partner with the team to not do that. So I really think that in order to be agile, it's really, making sure from an operational standpoint, you have the process in place, you have the people there, the resources, and then you're working cross-functionally and have that true alignment so that you can work quickly or make quick decisions, but not in a way, like you said, where it would burn out the whole team and or cause friction there. So
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and that kind of brings me to the next question. It's a little bit of a pivot from that, but it's interesting because, in just a short period of time, marketing operations has changed so much. And we've seen that even more in the last year. And I think specifically, if we talk about even technology, that's shifted from even the definition of like, what is MarTech anymore, and when that tech stack changes and you have remote work and a complete pivot toward digital events and activities, there's this general need for alignment with other teams. And to your point earlier, I think that there was that need prior. But there's also this rising popularity in the concept of RevOps, right? And some orgs, that means, kind of like a function of, an official function. And for some, that's just a weekly meeting where, marketing ops, sales ops, and, customer success ops comes together and discuss, and finance come together, right? My question is, and this is actually something that I heard a lot from the community, was how are your clients, Chrissy, I'll start with you, I guess. How are your clients thinking about marketing ops as part of the larger organization? And what's the best way to balance cross-functional alignment with marketing priorities?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think also in some ways, like RevOps has become like a buzzword, but I think we've been talking about revenue in marketing for a long time and how, marketing supports that. And I think that also it causes this confusion across companies. Like, should we all put them into one team? Like, is that the right answer? And I would say that that notion is very nuanced, especially based on the size of the company and what they're doing. But the true thing is that there needs to be alignment. And I think more and more we're seeing that there is this blurred lines between the marketing ops, sales ops, even customer success ops. They all touch that same buyer journey and help support that, like that whole revenue engine. Even internally here at CS2, we're known for marketing ops, but we do a lot more than that. Like we do what people would consider sales ops or customer success ops, because all of those systems and tools, all of the process in place need to be in true alignment and they support that whole journey. So I think now, our clients are starting to see that, but I think organizations are starting to see that. And yes, that might mean moving toward one org that everyone rolls up together. But I don't think that that's necessarily the answer. I think the answer is really having that true alignment. And that could be dotted lines, to the group, but really they're a resource for the marketing team or a resource for the sales team, but they need to share a change log for these systems. They need to share documentation. They need to be in true alignment meeting often. And they need to have like canonical definitions for things so that everyone across the organization has clear alignment and speaks the same language.
Yeah, that's great. I do think it's becoming more of a buzz. It is a buzzword today, but I think it's becoming just more and more popular in organizations. And I think now the pain is real, right? And so I think getting to that point is going to be kind of like the next phase of a challenge with, cross-functional alignment. Rebecca, I guess for you and really as someone has been running marketing and running a whole organization, what do you think is the right mix of an organizational structure to keep businesses aligned at scale?
Well, I agree with Chrissy that it really just depends on the size of your organization and the maturity. Yeah. Alignment and some sort of, you need to be able to protect operations and business, teams from doing the wrong thing, overwork, a misalignment between expectation and what can actually be achieved. So I would say it really just depends on the size of the organization. We've been talking about revenue operations for years and years and years. And I've worked with companies, either as an employee or as a consultant, where we're trying to do that between marketing and sales and success, but there's really no C-level push to do that. And I think it needs to come from the top. So, there are a bunch of considerations. Do you have a CMO? Do you have a CRO? Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Mm-hmm. Are you a SaaS business? All these things factor into the decision about whether or not it makes sense to try to move to that model. Because the reality is, marketing ops is king. It's the big kahuna. It's the hugest thing, and it's a significant operation as soon as you have a website and email marketing. Sales ops is really more of right-hand man to the head of sales. And this isn't a negative comment on sales at all, but you can't have people wagging the dog. So if the big system and big machine is in marketing, then it really is something that should probably fall into the marketing function. So I think marketing ops is sufficient for most companies. And in fact, moving to RevOps would probably thwart your growth, because as soon as you create a bureaucratic, barrier between getting something done and getting something done quickly, you're not going to be able to service the organization the way that they want marketing to service the organization. So I would say marketing ops is probably fine for most companies. But when you start growing into a mature organization and you have tighter organizational alignment, everybody's working to a common goal. And this means there can't be a disconnect in terms of goals and compensation. So in other words, you have to compensate people for the stuff you want them to do between sales, marketing, success. So that's really, really important. The other thing is that, people talk about RevOps a lot, and they're kind of talking about different things. Like Chrissy said, it could just be, or you said, Aubrey, it could just be a weekly meeting, or it could be an actual function. And then where that function resides is up to debate still. Some people would say that RevOps is really marketing, sales, and finance. And then, in a SaaS business, you would say, what about success? And then other product-led businesses would say, what about product? So, it totally depends on the context and the business you're in, what you're trying to achieve, and really how the organization works, whether or not RevOps would make sense. But again, marketing is the big customer to a marketing ops organization. And so that kind of has to take the forefront.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned, Rebecca, aligning to a common goal. So I did want to kind of transition into this idea of putting the customer at the heart of the business. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of the one common goal. We've heard this pre-COVID, but especially now, that's what keeps customers loyal and coming back, studies have shown. And actually, Forrester research finds that businesses who place the customer at the center of everything they do are more likely to succeed and grow. And so we've been hearing this for a while, but what's interesting is that many sales and marketing leadership dashboards are still primarily focused on internal metrics like conversion, velocity, and pipeline. That feels misaligned with the customer journey and customer value, right? Like, how are we measuring that? So, Rebecca, I'll just go back to you. Why is it that so many leadership dashboards do not reflect what we continuously say is our number one priority to the business, which is customer value? And I guess, how do we better reflect that value that we produce for buyers and customers?
Well, customer value is really, it's in the eyes of the beholder, right? So it's what the customer is valuable. So, we make tools that companies use to create results of some kind, whatever they're trying to do. The value is intrinsic to what they realize from that tool. So, in some ways it's similar to brand. It's a dance between a company and a customer, and it's sort of this third thing that happens between them. Same thing with brand. You have an emotional connection to a brand. That's sort of a third thing that's created between a customer and a company. I would say that it's the same thing with customer value. So, the best anecdotal, I rely on sales always to tell me stuff about the customer all the time. They really are the subject matter experts. They are with them all the time. They know what's driving the business planning and so forth. Success people, same thing. They know what's going on with the actual customer. So that's really important. So I would say that anecdotal evidence is really funneled from sales and success. But the tangible measures are renewals, expansions, references, advocacy, partnerships. So it's all the actual long-term value of having that customer. If you're not getting people to talk about you, they won't give you use of their logo. That means they don't really love your product and they don't really love you. So those are really the tangible things to do. Definitely.
I'd add a couple things in there. You brought up some good things. I think something else I would like to see more of as, and I'm really speaking to myself as a marketing ops persona here, but how are we measuring like ease of doing business or risk mitigation or perception of trust? And I think that's how we can get better aligned with even just like corporate marketing and the brand, right? Like measuring brand has always been difficult. And I think we can actually use this, we can start to really think about data to pull in these traditionally qualitative metrics, right? And kind of bring people together. And Christy, my question for you now is how does MOPS as the owner of the majority of customer data empower the rest of our org to make, customer value-based decisions? And I guess what has been preventing most businesses from getting there even today?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I think I'll probably need more time to think about it even in the future as we evolve. But I think that the first thing is I think we as MOPS people need to get more comfortable knowing that, there's more to report on than just what like lives on a dashboard in Salesforce and getting comfortable with that. I think a lot of times we're kind of feel like we need to be forced to do that because we need to provide these dashboards that prove something, prove our impact, prove marketing, but it needs to be in one place. And I would say rethinking that. And I think for many orgs are realizing how important it is to engage our customers and attract them. And for some of those new ways of doing that, they're a lot harder to track, right? There's these invisible touch points, or there are these things that are a lot harder to track, like podcasts, for example, or LinkedIn posts, and I think for these companies that are more forward thinking and starting to do that, they're realizing, these are activities that we need to do. It's important for our brand. It can be scary and confusing though for leadership to be like, well, how are we going to get leads from that? Like they're all stuck into this notion of how are we going to get leads from that? How are you going to report on that? And I think for marketing ops, I think there's one showing that there's maybe other ways of tracking that. And so it kind of echoes Rebecca, but for these invisible touch points or things that are hard to give attribution, I think for me, there's two ways you can kind of go about that too. There's like correlated data, which is, for brand, is your cost of customer acquisition going down? Usually if your brand's really strong, it doesn't cost as much to actually acquire a new customer. And so if you start to track that going down, of course, tracking revenue going up is first, but for brand perspective, which I think can be a little bit harder, that's a good one to track. As well as, are your website views going up, especially on days where there's a podcast or, or maybe a member of your team was on a podcast, or are you seeing a lot of referral traffic from LinkedIn, like organically? These are all things, and you can be crafty, like maybe they're not all pointing to one system, but maybe you can figure out, as you get more advanced in your data, how do we gather all these different sources of data and provide a story? And the narrative is always the number one thing around reporting. I think marketing ops needs to be more mindful of this. Like there's the data, but there's the narrative, and executives and the company, as long as they know what that story is, what the narrative is, they'll be comfortable making those changes. And I think the more we can get into that habit with the company, the better. And then the second type of data is more anecdotal data, like Rebecca said. Like you can actually gather information along this customer journey. Survey your customers. What are they enjoying? What are they not happy with? What are they actually happy with? Or someone signs up for a trial. Literally ask them, how did they hear about you? I know that's not 100%. Sometimes people are skewed by like how they know they found out about you, but it's a step, and you can even do that at the end of a demo. So I think the key thing is to try and figure out how can you gather much of that data to give insight into, the customer value, and then creating a process around that, and then a narrative and story around the data that you do find.
That is an awesome point. The storytelling piece is such an important point that I think we forget about, because, and this is the transition from, I do think marketing ops as like a more of an execution focus to a strategic role in the business. Because if it's easy for marketing ops who've been doing this for a while to just look at data and be like, why doesn't anyone get it? Like, here it is, look at it. And I do think the storytelling piece is what separates, a tactical execution focused role into a strategic role. And I think that is a really awesome point that you made that I will be reciting over and over again after this. So thank you, Chrissy. I guess I have two more quick questions before we jump into audience Q&A, and there already are a couple questions adding up here. So one thing is this notion of the single customer view, right? The value of personalization represents trillions in revenue to businesses, but Gartner predicts anticipates by 2025 that marketers would have all but given up on achieving personalization. The main reason cited is usually a lack of data. Now we're kind of in this interesting stage where businesses have to consider improving the way first-party data is used, given restrictions being imposed on third-party data across ad platforms, Google being kind of the beginning of that. So question for both of you. What are we going to do about this? What do you recommend? Chrissy, why don't you take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I think, and I this is not maybe an obvious answer to this, but I do think that it really comes down to also like the resources and budget for the team. I think for anything, for operations, because we're usually a little bit understaffed, is lack of, it's actually a lot more than that. And then also we don't usually have like as much of a defined budget. It's usually the supporting teams have budget, and then they kind of, request the technology or some things. But we do need more allocated budget for things around data, around platforms like Syncari, that we can actually invest in, that can help us tie all this data from different disparate siloed places into one place. I think I started in ops 11 years ago, and things were a lot simpler. Like we had our marketing automation platform, we had Salesforce. That was like our Bible, right? Salesforce. That's it. Let's just look there. That's all the data we have. And maybe we got some from, the marketing automation platform. But people, there were still touch points to customers, like SDRs were emailing, customer success was emailing too, but we didn't get insight into that. And so it was easier from a marketing ops perspective because there was less going on, less tech we had to manage, but we couldn't do the personalization or get the insights that we can now. And so I think if we have enough resources, if they're strategic enough to create the plan and we have the budget, then we can look to the processes and tech to help us gather all these insights on our customers, which I think are key because we have so many tools and things that can touch that customer journey that we talked about. It needs to have a lens on it, and we need to tie it all together to get that full insight. Because otherwise, we're probably pissing off some of our customers, not even realizing it, or there might be a sore area. If we're able to get ahead of that, we can keep our customers happy, or re-engage them in your product and so forth. So,
that's awesome. Rebecca, I guess same exact question for you. What are we going to do about personalization and the move toward exclusive first-party data in the future?
Well, personalization means one thing to one person and one thing to another person. So
I don't give you black and white questions. So.
The hi, Rebecca, doesn't matter at all. I'm going to send you content or surface to you content that's relevant to your business needs. That does matter. It matters a lot. So personalization the needs are going to grow. We're going to need more and more sort of prospect specific content and flows and threads so that we can warm them up organically. So with regard to personalization, I think that's the issue. So first party, third party, I mean, the rules are changing all the time. Sometimes I have to go back and check what the rules are. California has rules, the United States has rules, Europe has rules. If you have, a tiny bit of your business in Ireland, how does that affect you? All of these things.
Marketing ops is, sorry to interrupt, marketing ops is kind of becoming, we're getting into the legal business now too, so.
Exactly. And it's hard to, you can't give a comprehensive answer because you're not a lawyer and you're not an expert in this field of law, but also because it's changing all the time and there are overlays everywhere. So that's an issue. I think the biggest hurdle to personalization really is just that data is alive. So it's messy. Some of it's structured, some of it is unstructured. It changes constantly. Just capturing the data and hosting it and maintaining it requires a massive infrastructure. So if data isn't held sacred by your C-suite, then you're kind of screwed. And achieving a single customer view or single source of truth is going to be much, much harder. Second thing is that you need to have a mutual understanding across the organization about what data means. So it's subjective in a lot of ways, but it's not. So let's decide what data means, what fields mean, what flows mean, what a combination of signals mean to the business, and then let's all be on the same page about that. I think that most companies really struggle with what the data means. The bigger the machine and the more data, the more people are involved, the more inputs, the more fields, the more risk, and the more integration points, which all just feeds the cycle of more unclean, unstructured, complicated data. So we do need to come up with some kind of a solution that mitigates the problem of a super complicated tech stack. Because now most people, even for a simple company, they're running at least 12 products, and then there are companies I know who are running 50, 60, 70 products for their marketing ops organization.
Yeah.
So the data is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think 12 technology seems so light now. We're at Syncari is still pretty small and we're running way more than that. And so I think that's the norm now. If you're a company even if you're an old company, you have a lot of legacy infrastructure that you're dealing with. And if you're a brand new company, it's all this cloud stuff. And so it's only going to get worse. It's gotten, so much worse in the past year. I wouldn't say worse, but the problem has gotten worse with data coming from all these different systems, not speaking the same language. So,
the problem's exponential, right? So if you don't clean it up in year 1 or year 2, then by year 5, it gets worse and worse and worse. 10 years ago, I was having dinner with some friends and one of the guys was a VC and he asked me, he was working with a company. It's become a well-known company now. And he said, if you had limited budget, Rebecca, and you have a team of your initial 10 people or whatever, would you focus on capturing data or generating leads? And I said, capturing data. Because from the capture of data, you will be able to get leads that are actually warm rather than going out and paying high dollar for. So I was like, the cost of business is totally different. It's a long-term goal to focus on the organic and the data, but that's actually the much bigger win for you than for the short-term cyclical buying leads or just, pushing content out to people and then shoving data back into the systems.
Yeah, awesome. So just for the sake of time, I just want to do one final question, just close out with a couple just takeaway items, but quick round robin. Chrissy, start with you. What advice would you give to marketing ops leaders today?
Yeah. So I think my advice is to think about the future. I think we can't predict the future, but I think that a lot of times we think we can cut corners or add a bunch of technology without a plan, or wait until we feel the pain of not having enough real resources, or even dealing with like bad data once it becomes a huge problem. And so I think for the marketing ops leaders, think about your future self. Like, things don't have to be so reactive. They should be, active. Like, you should be proactive when it comes to these things. So everything you can do now and make a habit will ensure that you can be agile and more strategic in the future. The things that are always keeping marketing ops people from being strategic is when they're being reactive and they're doing firefighting and they're just dealing like you're in that. But when you have the breathing room to create a roadmap, figure out your priorities, align them to the business, and do the things like you said, they're going to elevate you, like working on your data and reporting so you can create that narrative for the business. That's going to be what separates your function and makes you look as a strategic part of the business.
The storytelling thing is so huge. Marketers are in the business of telling stories. The stories can be true, but in order for other human beings to care, they need to be turned into a narrative. Marketing ops people, their customers basically like the CEO and the CFO and the CMO, and as it goes. But their customers ultimately the C-suite and what matters to them. So being able to tell your story and make to be able to advocate for your program, protect your long-term projects while also having the agility to deliver quick wins. This is massive. And it's the difference between sort of a first mover type marketing ops organization and marketing organization, and one that isn't. So that was basically my last point about that. So, I would say, know your customer. That's important for every marketer, and especially for marketing ops managers, directors, VPs, revenue ops.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Just a couple things to close out here. Some emerging priorities that we're seeing, and we touched on these in our discussion today. This notion of hyper agility. CMOs are continuing to prepare for a sustained period of uncertainty, and marketing ops is well positioned to help CMOs by developing agility and responsiveness in marketing process. As budgets get tighter and teams get leaner, optimization is going to minimize the overall customer experience, and marketing ops is in a unique position to attack that. And then, that actually brings me to the second point, which is world-class customer experiences. We need to put the customer at the center of, everything that we do, not just in storytelling, but in the products that the organization builds. And we need to know who our customers are and what motivates them and their emotional dynamics with the brand, right? And so all this information is required to be successful today. Another emerging priority, which we didn't discuss today, is just brand activism, purpose-driven messaging. With everything that happened in the last year, it's almost expected. And as you think about Gen Z, they really attach to, and this is actually a very significant cultural shift. It wasn't too long ago before brands needed to stay out of politics, stay out of social issues, and now you have Gartner says 95% of CMOs believe brands should take the lead in finding solutions to major societal and cultural issues. And over half of consumers say those actions impact their purchasing behavior. And we moved from brand promises to life promises. There's a lot of people that need a lot of help right now with everything that's been going on. And they turn to the brands to help them work through that, or to decide who they rely on more, right? Or care for more, or are loyal to. And then, of course, we made the case for data. So, we've been using tools and technologies to understand the pulse of marketing. And we need to know what themes are being talked about in real time and aligning our go-to-market strategy behind that constantly. And so that, having easy access to data for the entire business and usable data is critical. And that's something that we're going to see more and more of. And then Syncari, so just to quickly explain why we're here today, Syncari is here to deliver the data-driven promise. It is made for operators. It's a codeless interface that syncs data and automates processes to ensure high quality, privacy compliant data in every system. It also allows you to clean your data, merge, dedupe everything in one place across multiple systems. And it's zero code. So I use it, I'm using it today, and it is a really cool company that is doing some really cool things and really trying to address the serious pain that we've discussed for the course of this session. And then finally, I will, in our follow-up email, and I will attach it here, there are a couple assets that I recommend learn more about what we've discussed today. First and foremost, we have a great ebook, The Definitive Guide to Data Automation, where we've talked to over 100 operators, sales ops, marketing, rev ops on how to kind of attack this data journey that we're all experiencing at some capacity, the pains of which we are experiencing. And then our demo hub and on-demand demo video library, just to understand what Syncari does. You can just see 2-minute videos of things like lead to account matching, how to dedupe your data, and how to build a version of your customer 360 across multiple systems. And finally, be sure to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter. Chrissy and Rebecca are both data superheroes. They're on our board of advisors, and you can see why based off of these amazing insights. And it's a great newsletter that we send out every other week. So thank you both for this. And I guess we are out of time. Unfortunately, there were some questions we didn't get to, so I will be sure to follow up with the questions post-webinar. Thank you all so much again, and thank you, Chrissy and Rebecca, for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'm gonna send all the assets in case people are still here. All right. Thank you again.